Hey, brothers and sisters. Well, I had an interesting little experience, I think, here last night. Uh, got a really bad cold. I went to bed, and I would usually like to just, read the Bible for a bit before I go to bed or before I go to sleep. And I was just sort of thinking in my head, Lord, I really don't have uh, any concentration. If you're going to show me something, you're going to have to put the cookies on the lower shelf because I'm just not all there. And cracked open the Bible. I didn't even have anything in my head, and it landed in John's Gospel, chapter 6. And it had to do with, you know, Jesus feeding the thousands with the fish and the loaves. And I was reading it, and it dropped in on my head. It's like, I think there's a pretty incredible type being shown with this parable, and kind of in my cold medication fog, I didn't trust what I was thinking. But it did remind me of something. I did a video going all the way back to, let's see, it would have been Pentecost or just before last spring. And it talked about the threefold resurrection, and it likened it to the harvests, the Jewish harvest, the or the barley harvest, and the wheat harvest, and then the fruit and nut harvest at the end of the year, the Feast of Ingathering. And we were going through seeing, is Pentecost represent then the wheat harvest, and does that tell us anything about the timing of the rapture? And it was all pure speculation. I was just putting it out there because I've been challenged a little bit to go dig in to figure out if Pentecost makes sense, at least in my opinion, as a day for the rapture. And I came out of there just intrigued with the whole idea. But probably about 3-4 months ago now, I was watching somebody else's YouTube video, and they made a quick reference to something I'd completely forgotten about, which was uh, that in the Middle East, in Jewish tradition, the wheat, after it was harvested, um, part of the threshing process was to run a tribulum over it. So let's take a quick look at what we're talking about here. I found a video from Dr. Peter Reynolds talking about the tribulum.
We'll start again. When you've got something like a tribulum, and this is a replica we've made of a Mediterranean tribulum. You'll find ones like this throughout the Mediterranean zone. This has got large flints, few of them in it, and other ones have many flints, lots and lots of them stuck in the floor, or even just bits of stone. The meaning of a tribulum is a rubber, but effectively it's used as a threshing sledge. And the idea behind it is that you lay the product from the harvest in a circular area or an area, which the word area comes from, and then you drag this thing either with a mule or a horse, or even humans could actually pull a threshing sledge round and round and round. And the idea is that it actually rubs the seed out of the ears and it chops the straw up into chaff.
Okay,
Now
so
that's
we
fine.
saw what the tribulum is for, and it's my understanding that they use the tribulum mostly on wheat, because wheat, the outer husk of the kernel is tough, and the tribulum is breaking that down so that you actually get the inside kernel is what you're trying to get to on wheat, and so the rest of it becomes chaff. And I don't think they use it on barley, as I understand it, and I'm not a farmer. But I guess barley, the kernel is softer to begin with, and so um, that was my little lesson. Now the problem with that is it sort of blows the metaphor of the church being the wheat at Pentecost, uh, being raptured out, because if the tribulum sled, which was commonly used back then, was potentially picturing the tribulation, and the wheat has to go through the tribulation in order to be useful. Um, it looks like it blows the model, unless you're a post-trib believer, which I don't even want to go there because so many of the passages argue against it. So my wheels were spinning last night in between, you know, cold medication and blowing my nose, and I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm not sure I got it nailed, but whenever these metaphors are used in the Bible, they're consistent, and um, there's actually a hermeneutic or a rule of interpretation called expositional constancy, and that's basically what it means is that these metaphor usages are consistent throughout the Bible. And so if the harvests um, don't represent groups of people going through the resurrection, it needs to represent something that's consistent. And so I did some study in the Bible, and again, I'm not completely convinced I got this yet, but I'm open to anybody else that wants to dig deeper. I went into Google and I searched for, uh, metaphors, harvest, wheat, barley, actually fruit, for the Feast of Ingathering. And it seemed like it was, I only looked at half dozen of these references. It seemed like it was kind of all over the board. Um, and maybe there's just, I didn't hit websites that, were the better definition. But setting that aside, I found this in Bible study tools, definition of the harvest. And the metaphorical usage of harvest takes on a positive sense when Jeremiah refers to Israel as God's first fruit of harvest. In the New Testament, believers may sow and reap a spiritual harvest of righteousness. 2 Corinthians 9:10. However, most usages allude to judgment. The prophets indicate that the Lord destroyed the harvest in judgment. It goes through judgment, judgment, judgment. So that was interesting, but not super helpful. And where's this all going to? I'm going to start here with, I did a search. Now, I did the search in eSword, but it's easier to represent it in Bible Gateway, so I just pasted all the references in here. Let me just read through a handful of these and then talk about first, this is the wheat. Indeed, this is John the Baptist. He's got a bunch of the Jewish people coming out to see him to be baptized. And he says, Indeed, I baptized you with water unto repentance, but he that come after me is mightier than I, whose shoes I am not worthy to bear. He shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire, whose fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor, and gather his wheat into the garner, or barn, I guess, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. So there's a reference to wheat. And, I'm not going to make too much of this, but Matthew had the Jewish people coming out to see him. And he's likening them to wheat, or it's metaphorically, they are wheat in his little thing here. In Matthew 13, we get the next reference that a lot of people like to use. But while man slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among his wheat and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, did thou not sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? And he said unto them, an enemy has done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while you gather up the tares, you root up the wheat with them. And I think I hit this in a different video where if you take the general rule of thumb that Matthew's gospel was being written to the Jewish people, and you want to stay with the Jewishness theme, you would probably see in this then again the wheat being the good Jewish people and the tares being, the say the believing Jewish people and the tares being the non-believing Jewish people. And then in Luke, we get whose fan is in his hand, and he thoroughly purged his floor, gathered the wheat into his garner, but the chaff he'll burn with fire. Now that's just a repeat of this Matthew 1. I'm not sure we learned anything from that. And then there's a reference, and the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. And I left this in here only because we went from metaphor to simile, and we're not, I'm not dealing with simile in this study, so I'm going to kind of hold that one out. So you could say potentially here that wheat is the believing Jewish remnant or the believing Jews in Jesus, because we get, John the Baptist was preparing the way and for Jesus' arrival. Now, um, let's hit uh, the fruits harvest next, and then come back to the barley harvest. And the reason why I'm doing this is I was a little stuck on this one, and that's where the definition of the harvest became important, because it said harvest frequently refers to judgment, which in my mind, if the Feast of Ingathering was being celebrated, wouldn't it be a celebration, of course, of the bounty of the Lord, but metaphorically, wouldn't it be positive and not negative? So I have to admit, this one I think it's possible. I'm still not sure this is right. So let's just read this Matthew 21 reference. Here another parable. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard. And a vineyard, grapes, it's the grapes and the nuts from the trees and stuff that that are the last harvest of the year for the Jewish people, and hedged around about it, and digged a wine press in it, and built a tower, and let it out to the husbandmen, and went forth into a far country. That sure sounds like Jesus there. And when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandmen that they might receive his fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. And again he sent out other servants, more than the first, and they did unto him likewise. But last of all he sent unto them his son, saying, they shall reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and let's seize his inheritance. And they caught him and cast him out of the vineyard and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what shall he do unto the husbandman? They say unto him, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and he will let out his vineyard to other husbandmen, which shall render him the fruits in their season. And Jesus said unto them, Did ye never read the scriptures? The stone that the builder rejected, the same is become the head corner. This is the Lord's doing. It's marvelous in our eyes. So there you see a big long parable likening the unbelievers to the grapes in the vineyard, and then is the context is truly, Jesus being rejected, right? So we get that, and then it sort of ties up with, in Revelation we see this picture. And another angel came to the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar and had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry unto him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust his sickle into earth, and gathered the vine, of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. So there you definitely get, again, the unbelievers metaphorically being grapes being cast into a great wine press. So what am I going to here then? Well, if these harvesting metaphors aren't going to be, you know, about these resurrections, which I'm not convinced I'm right, what are they? And I'm going to make the argument potentially that what we've got is groups of people, not in the order of resurrection, but in the sort of in the class or the grouping as God's dealing with them. So here's my thought. The wheat represents the believing uh, Jews. The barley is going to represent the predominantly Gentile church. Um, and then, as we saw here, the grapes or the fruit harvest being represented by the unbelieving people that get cast into God's winepress. So let's just land then with the John 6 chapter I was reading last night so I can kind of explain what what the little aha was. So this is John 6, and what we've got is um, there is a lad here with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but where are they amongst so many? And Jesus said, make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples. The disciples said to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes, as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. Um, and what struck me last night then is this notion of, well, maybe barley is really this the predominantly Gentile church. And what went off in my mind is 5 barley loaves. Numbers are intentional in the Bible, so you kind of got to figure out why. Well, why was there 5 barley loaves? Five's the number of grace. And if barley is the believing church, believing predominantly Gentile church, you've got God's grace of the believing Gentile church, and you got 2 fishes, which, 2 is witnessing. So they're potentially God's witness during the age of grace. So I don't want to overread this, but this is what struck me last night. And then Jesus made him sat down, and this big group ate. Now what's happening here, obviously, is that is multiplying in great degree, right? And then when they were all filled, they gather up all the fragments that nothing may be lost. Well, Jesus said, um, all that the Father has given me, I have lost not one. It was in reference to the church. And so when the Father draws people to Christ, he hands them over to Jesus, and Jesus has not lost one. And that sure seems representative here, that all the fragments get brought back, that nothing is lost. And then when they had filled them together, they had 12 baskets of the fragments from the 5 barley loaves, which remained over. And so there you see, Jesus sent out the 5 barley loaves, and it comes back as 12 baskets of these barley fragments. So you see this incredible multiplication of what happened. None were lost, okay, and 12 represents government. And so when Jesus brings back, the barley loaves to himself, that could represent here now the government that's going to be established with, as we see in Revelation, with the elders are kings and priests unto the Lord. And so is this just picturing that we're part of Jesus' government when we return to him? So that's what blew me away last night, but it requires a reinterpretation potentially of what the harvests mean in the Bible, which is a little unsettling in some ways because so many people, including myself, looked at the barley harvest and the wheat harvest and the ingathering harvest as potentially, the church, the tribulation saints, and the Old Testament saints, and the order of the harvest. But I guess that I'm going to just say, let's rethink this This would be such powerful typology if that's correct about, you know, Jesus sending out the small uh, Gentile church uh, with grace to be his witness. And then there's a great multiplication that occurs of the barley, and then he picks up and none are lost. That just seems so strong to me. And then when we return to him, we become 12 baskets of fragments from the barley loaf. So uh, I want to challenge to say, is the wheat really the predominantly Jewish remnant? And we know from Romans 11 that, you know, blindness in parts happened to the Jewish people until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. Is that basically telling us that the wheat, you know, part of God's plan is has to go into the tribulation, and so the tribulum being rubbed over the wheat would metaphorically make sense, so that there's a heart change there. He goes from a stony heart to a soft heart, just like the tribulum breaks the outer husk of the wheat off. That metaphor seems pretty strong. Then you get, you know, the grapes of wrath, if you want to say, that we looked at here, representing non-believers. They're cast into God's winepress during toward the end of the tribulation there, and then again the barley being the predominantly Gentile uh, church. So let me know what you think about that one. Um, this was just so cool last night, and again, I just was in no mood to think very hard, but that's what stuck with me, and let me know if you see it too. Thanks.